The episode begins with something small, almost harmless. Lois notices that Stewie looks a tiny bit taller than usual. Nothing dramatic, just barely noticeable. She smiles and says, "You're growing fast, sweetie." But Stewie doesn't reply with a joke or a sarcastic remark. He simply stares at her with a long, heavy, unreadable look and quietly says, "Much faster than you think." The next day, he's already up to her shoulder. His voice has changed, deeper, slower, with a strange, trembling tone beneath it. Peter jokes that Stewie might finally be useful for basketball, but the laughter dies instantly when he sees Stewie standing perfectly still, eyes locked on him, studying him like an experiment. By the second day, Stewie is taller than Peter, no longer a baby, but something that looks like an adult stretched out of a child's proportions. His face is still Stewie's, but enlarged in ways that look wrong, with features elongated just slightly too far. His shoulders have broadened, his arms hang a bit too long, and his eyes are empty now. When he speaks, his words come slowly, carefully, like he's choosing them not from English, but from some other language entirely. Stewie moves through the house like he owns it. No tantrums, no jokes, no whining, only watching. Especially Lois, especially Brian. Lois asks what's happening to him, and Stewie bends down, far too close, and answers in a calm, adult voice, "I'm finally becoming what I was meant to be." On the third evening, Peter comes home. The house is strangely silent. Only one light is on in the living room. When Peter steps inside, the first thing he sees is Lois sitting on the couch, hands folded, eyes dim, expression flat. Next to her is Brian, head lowered, defeated, and wearing a metal chain around his neck like a real dog. He won't look Peter in the eyes. Standing in front of them is Stewie, enormous. His head almost reaches the ceiling now, his childlike face stretched further, unsettling and distorted, his smile appearing and disappearing, like he's practicing how to mimic emotion. He turns slowly toward Peter. "From now on," Stewie says, voice heavy and calm, "I'm the head of this family. Things will be better. You weren't managing it well." Peter steps back, horrified. "Stewie, this is insane. You can't..." Stewie tilts his head at a sharp angle, joints cracking softly. "I can do anything." Lois tries to speak, but Stewie's eyes snap toward her, and she goes silent immediately, as if the sound drains out of her throat. Brian whimpers quietly. Peter gathers courage to argue again, but Stewie takes one step toward him. The floorboards groan, the lamps flicker. "The era of chaos is over, Peter," Stewie says. "Order begins with me." The lights go out. The episode cuts to black. The final post-scene appears without sound. The dining room table. At the head sits Stewie, enormous, calm, perfectly content. To his left sits Lois, miserable, hands folded, eyes blank. To his right, on a chain, sits Brian, like a pet, staring down at the floor. The camera slowly pulls back. Stewie turns his head toward it and softly says, "This is how it was always meant to be." The episode begins with something completely ordinary. Peter and Brian are walking down the street, joking around, enjoying an evening stroll. Peter tells a dumb joke. Brian gives his usual sarcastic chuckle. Everything feels normal, until a stray dog, dirty, wild-looking, fur bristling, suddenly runs out from behind a parked car. It lunges at Brian, bites him, and bolts into the distance before Peter even realizes what happened. "Whoa! Brian, are you okay?" Peter shouts. Brian looks at him, and in that moment Peter freezes. Brian's pupils suddenly dilate, massively, unnaturally, spreading like black ink across his eyes. For a second, his expression goes blank, empty, like he doesn't recognize the world around him. "I'm fine," Brian says, too calmly, too emotionlessly, like he's repeating someone else's words. Peter doesn't believe him. The next day, Brian looks worse, much worse. His pupils stay huge even in bright light. The fur around his neck stands up as if permanently electrified. His canines are longer, sharper, visible even when his mouth is closed. He barely speaks, and when he does, it sounds like two voices are overlapping. That evening, he paces the house in long, quiet steps that leave no sound behind. Peter catches glimpses of his shadow bending strangely on the walls, lagging a half-second behind his movements. Stewie eventually says, "Peter, I'm taking him outside. I think something's wrong with him." And Stewie leaves with Brian. Hours pass, then Brian returns. Alone, Peter rushes to him. "Brian, where's Stewie? Where is he?" Brian looks up slowly and smiles, a huge, unnatural smile stretching too far across his muzzle. Then he starts laughing. Not a normal laugh, a broken, echoing, strangled laugh. Stewie never comes back. Terrified, Peter and Lois drive Brian to an animal shelter, hoping vets will help him. Medicine, testing, anything. The staff say they'll keep him under supervision. They promise everything is under control. Days pass. The house grows quiet, too quiet. One evening, Peter comes home earlier than usual. He opens the front door and instantly feels something wrong. The air inside is cold, heavy, unmoving. Lois? Chris? Meg? No voices, no footsteps, no sounds. He steps deeper into the house, and then he sees it. Brian is standing in the middle of the living room, but it isn't Brian anymore. Before Peter stands a massive creature, towering, monstrous. His neck fur has grown into a full bristling mane. His fangs are enormous, jutting out even when his mouth is closed. His limbs are thick, powerful, and his chest rises with slow, thunderous breaths. His eyes glow faintly red. And most terrifying of all, he stands upright on two legs, like a person. Shadows tremble around him as if the room is too small to contain him. Peter steps back. The creature steps forward, and in a soft, eerily gentle voice it says, "I came back, Peter." It started on a night that felt colder than usual, even though the thermostat was set the same as always. Peter woke up around 2:37 a.m. because he heard Brian pacing in the hallway, slow, uneven footsteps, like he was dragging one paw behind him. Peter got up, annoyed, ready to tell him to stop doing dog stuff so loudly. But when he opened the bedroom door, he froze. Brian was standing halfway down the hallway, but not like Brian. His back was arched, his fur stood straight up along his neck in jagged spikes, and he was breathing in long, shuddering gasps, as if every inhale hurt. Brian, you okay, buddy?" Peter asked. Brian turned toward him, not just his head, his entire upper body twisted in a way no dog's body should. His eyes were wide, unfocused, shaking. Before Peter could react, Brian charged. The hall lights flickered violently as Brian sprinted toward him, claws scraping deep into the wooden floor. Peter screamed and ran back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him just as something huge crashed into it from the other side. The door bent inward. Brian's growl, deeper, layered, wrong, vibrated through the walls. Then, suddenly, silence. Peter waited for minutes, maybe hours, too scared to move. When morning came, Brian was gone. For the next couple of days, the house felt wrong. Shadows moved a little too slowly. The nights lasted a few minutes longer than they should have. Lois asked where Brian was, but Peter couldn't explain without sounding insane. Chris swore he saw something big behind the garbage cans at 4 a.m. Meg said she heard heavy breathing outside her window. No one slept. 2 days later, they finally found him. Or what used to be him. A neighbor reported strange noises coming from the woods behind the Griffin house. Not screams, not growls, something between them. Peter, Lois, and Brian's old caller headed into the forest together. though none of them were sure why. The deeper they went, the more wrong the trees seemed. Bark peeled off in long strips. The branches were bent downward as if something huge had brushed through them. The air felt heavy, thick, pressing into their lungs. And then they saw it. A clearing. Dead quiet. No wind. No birds. In the center stood a creature, massive, hunched, covered in rough, spiked fur. Its neck bristled upward like a crown of knives. Its body was bigger than a bear, but its outline shifted and glitched, as if it wasn't fully connected to the world. Peter whispered, "Brian." The creature turned. For one split second, they saw Brian's face, stretched, trembling, begging, buried inside the monstrous shape. Then the face twisted into something else, something that wasn't Brian, something that had learned to wear his shape. The creature let out a long, hollow exhale that made the trees shake. Then it moved. Peter and Lois ran, but the forest twisted, paths curling into each other. Every direction looked the same. The creature followed without rushing. It didn't need to. It knew the woods better than they did. It knew how to wait. The final shot of the episode showed the Griffin living room, empty and quiet. Brian's food bowl sat by the wall. His collar was gone. The forest outside the window swayed unnaturally, like something large was moving between the trees. A pair of glowing eyes appeared for just one frame, too fast to register unless you paused. Then the screen cut to black. It all started so quietly that Peter didn't even notice anything was wrong at first. Brian just looked unwell. He spent more time lying on the couch, breathing slowly, blinking heavily, like he had some kind of cold he wasn't talking about. His voice was weaker. Lois brought him food. Chris covered him with a blanket. Stewie even joked that Brian was finally acting like an elderly dog. But Peter noticed something odd. Every night, at around the same time, Brian disappeared for a couple of hours. Peter heard slow, dragging footsteps in the hallway, almost like Brian was pacing half asleep. But whenever Peter got up to look, the hallway was empty. On the third day, everything changed. Brian suddenly said he felt amazing. Too amazing. He walked around the house with strange, unnatural energy, humming softly, cleaning things, complimenting everyone for tiny things. "You look wonderful today, Lois." "Meg, you're doing great." "Peter, I really appreciate you." His voice was too gentle, too even, and the way he smiled, his eyes stayed a little too wide. The family loved this new Brian. But Peter felt something wrong beneath it. One night, Peter woke up and saw Brian standing at the end of the hallway, staring at the wall, completely motionless. What are you doing?" Peter asked. Brian twitched slightly, like he had forgotten anyone else existed, and said, "Just thinking." But his mouth didn't move correctly when he said it. The next day, the first truly frightening thing happened. Brian stretched and yawned, and for a split second, Peter saw long, sharp fangs inside his mouth, far bigger than a dog should ever have. But Brian snapped his mouth shut instantly. "Peter, you're exhausted," he said softly. "You imagined it." That night, Brian's breathing became deep and low, like someone inhaling through a cavern. The fur around his neck began rising on its own, forming a strange, ragged mane. The house began to sound different. The walls seemed to vibrate slightly. And in the morning, Peter noticed Lois was gone. Her room was untouched, bed perfectly made, everything neat. But she was nowhere. Meg didn't answer. Chris didn't come to breakfast. All their rooms were empty, too clean, too silent. Only Brian remained. He sat by the window, back perfectly straight, staring outside. "Where is everyone?" Peter demanded. Brian didn't turn around. "They're fine," he said. "I told them to rest." His voice was warm, too warm, which only made it worse. The next evening, Peter returned home after work and felt a wave of cold air hit him as he stepped inside. The house was dark, quiet. Not cartoon quiet, real quiet, heavy and suffocating. Lois? Kids? No reply, just slow, heavy breathing coming from the living room. Peter flicked on the light. Brian was standing in the center of the room. Standing, not sitting. And he looked wrong. He had grown, taller, broader, heavier. The fur along his back and neck stood up like jagged spikes. His shadow stretched across the entire wall, moving with each breath as if it had its own pulse. His eyes shone with a glassy, reflective glow. "Brian, buddy, what's happening?" Peter whispered. Brian turned his head, but far too much, far too easily, at an angle no dog's neck should make. "Peter," he said softly, "you shouldn't have come back." Peter backed toward the door, gripping a chair with shaking hands. "Where is my family? Where are they?" Brian took one slow, heavy step. The floor groaned under his weight. "They're resting," he repeated. "I told them I'd take care of everything now." Peter grabbed a lamp like a weapon. "You're not Brian," he whispered. Brian smiled, a smile too wide, stretching a little too far. "I'm better," he said, and lunged. The lights flickered, the frame shook, and Peter's scream was swallowed by a deep, monstrous roar that made the whole room tremble. When the lights came back, the living room was empty, completely empty. Only one figure remained. Brian, or whatever he had become, sat calmly on the couch, breathing slowly, staring straight ahead. The house was silent around him. It all started when Brian became just a little quieter than usual. He stopped cracking jokes, barely argued with Stewie, and didn't complain about anything. At first, the family thought he was just tired, but within a couple of days, they noticed Brian's breathing had changed. Deep, slow, almost like something inside him was shifting. Peter joked it was allergies, but Lois was the first to see the muscles on Brian's back twitch, as if something under his fur was growing. That night, Brian paced around the house for hours, and every step he took sounded heavier, like he'd somehow become bigger. When Peter turned on the lights, Brian slipped into the shadows as if trying to hide. And the next morning, everyone noticed he actually was taller. Not by much, but enough to make everyone uncomfortable. On the third day, Meg disappeared. Peter walked through the whole house calling her name, but there was no answer. Brian just sat in the kitchen corner, staring at Peter without blinking, as if he knew more than he wanted to admit. Peter asked, "Brian, did you see where Meg went?" Brian slowly turned his head away. On the fourth day, Chris vanished too. His door was open, his bed messy, and his window lifted just slightly. When Peter approached Brian again, the dog didn't even look up. He just let out a long, deep breath. And in that moment, Peter thought Brian's shoulders looked broader, his claws just a little longer than before. On the fifth day, Lois never came down for breakfast. Peter searched every room in panic, calling her name, checking closets, looking outside. Nothing. The house felt too still, too empty, like something underneath it was breathing. He rushed to Brian, yelling, "Where's Lois? What's happening? Why won't you say anything?" But Brian only lifted his eyes that had grown too dark, too deep, reflecting something feral and enormous. By now, Brian took up almost half the kitchen. His chest rose and fell like a massive beast's, and his neck and shoulders were far too large for a normal dog. That night, Peter woke up to heavy footsteps moving slowly through the hallway. He stepped outside his room and saw a massive shadow passing the living room doorway. The shape was vaguely Brian-like, but far taller, almost reaching the ceiling. Peter wanted to call out, but in that moment he realized he was completely alone. Everyone else was gone, and every time he asked Brian about the missing family members, Brian simply stayed silent. On the final night, Peter gathered his courage and approached the living room. Brian was there, fully transformed now, enormous, broad, monstrous, his body rising and falling with slow, thunderous breaths. He sat in the center of the room, staring into the darkness like he was listening to something only he could hear. Peter stood a few feet away and whispered, "Brian, do you understand what you've done?" Brian slowly turned his head, looking straight at Peter with a gaze that had none of the old Brian left in it. The lights flickered. For a split second, the room was swallowed by darkness, and when the lamps came back on, Peter was gone. The house was silent again. Only Brian remained, massive, motionless, staring into the empty living room. And that's where the episode cut to black.